Among affluent countries, the US has notoriously low transit ridership rates. So what we're going to look at today is, in a sense, the worst of the worst. It's the 10 large American cities with the lowest transit ridership, and it's up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer suggested topics, strongly encouraged. And this is actually a double dip on a suggestion I already used. The comment was from viewer Caleb Taylor on my Mercados video, and the suggestion was to do a video on small cities with great public transit and large cities with bad public transit. Well, I already checked off part one a few weeks ago when I looked at the highest ridership systems in metro areas under 1 million. So today's video is sort of a companion piece. The lowest ridership systems in metros above 1 million. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on preliminaries here. I'm using the National Transit Database to aggregate unlinked passenger trips on fixed route services for all agencies that serve an urbanized area. It's the same approach I used for the Small Cities Big Transit video. So if you're really interested, I'll leave a link to that video down in the description. And just to set the stage, as a reminder, here's what the top 10 small city list looked like. There were exactly 10 small cities that had over 50 transit trips per capita in calendar year 2019, and 8 larger cities that exceeded that number, just for comparison. So New York is obviously a big outlier on this list, but here are some other global cities just for context. This is from UITP, the International Association of Public Transport, and it's a bit apples and oranges since I'm not totally sure where the numerator and the denominator are coming from for these, but I'll link it down in the description. So last thing, this is about cities where transit service is lacking. And look, this is a YouTube channel. Things are supposed to be visual, so it's hard to make a video about something that just isn't there. So even as we go through and shame cities with bad transit, I will try to pick out some things I like and highlight those. Not to let any of these cities off the hook, but I am a firm believer that if you have the commitment and you're clever about your housing location, you can still live a car-free or at least a car-light life in any of these cities. And even bad transit can still be a useful component. Okay, enough of my rambling. Let's get into it. Number 10 is Sacramento, and this is primarily service from the Sacramento Regional Transit District. So we're in the capital city of one of our most progressive-leaning states. It has light rail, and it still makes the bottom 10 list. The light rail system looks okay downtown, maybe a bit dated. You've got this nice segment on K Street, but I think it runs in mixed traffic. Let me know if I've got that wrong. And then once you get outside the city center, you just get these long segments of nothing. I feel like Sacramento kind of takes the prize for transit-oriented non-development, and just the sheer amount of station-adjacent land use that's devoted to park and rides. I mean, there might be something going on here at 65th on the Gold Line, but you'd expect better, wouldn't you? Isn't there a housing crisis going on? Someone explain this to me. Number 9 is Tampa-St. Petersburg. This is mostly Hillsborough area regional transit for Tampa and Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority for St. Pete. St. Pete is all bus, and I just kind of had a hard time finding anything I really liked here. Let's go with the Grand Central Bus Terminal. For Tampa, they have the Marion Transit Center downtown, but look at it. The adjacent land uses are like surface parking and a cemetery. And what development there is kind of faces away from the transit center. But Tampa does have the Teco streetcar line. Although I don't know if I've seen a streetcar line with so much surface parking along its frontage. You do have to say though, downtown Ybor City is pretty sweet, but it's really centered on 7th, which is a block off the streetcar line, and I just don't see much housing here. Tampa does have ferries and water taxis, so you could live the dream on Harbor Island, but I'm guessing it's not the most affordable location. The 8th worst city for transit is Cincinnati. There's some Northern Kentucky service included here, but it's mostly Southwest Ohio Regional Transit Authority, which, okay, so your transit service, the public agency you depend on to provide a backbone of essential, reliable mobility around the region. Its acronym is sorta? Do I have that right? Sorry, I'm sure that's an old joke for people who are familiar with the service, but it's new to me and I reserve the right to think it's funny. So there isn't a lot of transit-oriented development in Cincinnati. They just don't really have high capacity transit of any kind, even though they should have a subway. But what there is some pretty killer development-oriented transit. The Cincinnati streetcar runs between downtown and over the Rhine. And I just think this area around Findlay Market is jaw-droppingly great. In fact, I would submit to you that pound for pound, Cincinnati has the coolest historic urban fabric in the US. If you disagree, make your case down in the comments. Number 7 is Jacksonville. This is primarily Jacksonville Transportation Authority, and the ridership nearly all comes from the bus. But let's look at a couple things here. JTA does run kind of a quasi-BRT with the First Coast Flyer. It's got branded stops with amenities and a little bit of dedicated bus bike lane. Let me know down in the comments what you think of shared bus bike lanes. I'm not really a fan. The Flyer terminates downtown at Jacksonville Regional Transit Center at La Villa, where, okay, we have to talk about the Jacksonville Skyway, which has a station at La Villa. Spoiler alert, we're gonna talk about this a bit more later, but these elevated people movers, I mean, that's a lot to spend on infrastructure for something that is this low capacity. Anyway, there's actually a plan in place to expand the system and convert it to a guideway for autonomous vehicles. I don't know. What are you gonna do? Jacksonville gonna Jacksonville. Number 6 is Kansas City. Sorry, Casey. I know you show up a lot on my naughty lists, but you know, huge interchanges, tons of freeway lane miles, low transit ridership. It's all connected. Today though, I come to praise Kansas City. Well, at least a little. First, let's talk about their quasi-BRT, the MAX. This is a typical US style BRT, which means it has incrementally nicer buses than normal, incrementally wider stop spacing, incrementally better stop amenities, no apparent dedicated right-of-way or off-board payment, but it's something. And let's look at the segment that runs south down Warnall. You know, I plan to do a whole video on streetcar suburbs at some point, but honestly, I could do one just on Kansas City alone. Look at this area around 74th. You've got a trolley trail where the streetcar used to run, and look at the old urban fabric. It's kind of worn, but it's just so good. And then you've got the new Kansas City streetcar, which you'll notice a lot of these low performing cities do have streetcars, which I don't hate them, but they have to be just about the lowest ridership per capital dollar of investment you can make. I don't know. Anyway, it goes from Union Station at the south end, which is somewhat glorious and just kind of waiting for high-speed rail to come and reinvigorate it, to City Market north of downtown, which didn't make it into my Mercados video, but probably deserved an honorable mention. Downtown KC is just kind of frustrating though. I've talked about the freeway situation a few times, but the amount of surface parking is kind of jaw-dropping too. But it's all related. Number 5 is San Bernardino / Riverside, or the Inland Empire, or whatever you want to call it. I know the census defines this as a separate urbanized area and a separate metropolitan statistical area from Los Angeles, presumably because it's so far away. But this is Southern California. Everything is really far away from everything else. I mean, that's the whole point of Southern California. Anyway, you've got 2 main providers. Riverside Transit Agency, which runs buses and is currently offering 25-cent fares, apparently. It'd be interesting to come back and find out if that had any kind of impact on ridership. And then you've got Omnitrans for San Bernardino County. I talked about the SBX Green Line in my bus rapid transit video. The Green Line is bronze level BRT. It's center running. It has off-board payment. It has platform level boarding. It's really the only thing in today's video that I would call BRT with a straight face. Number 4 is Detroit, and I really hate putting Detroit on a list like this. I'm sure the economics of providing public services are just brutal right now, but the numbers are the numbers. There's the Suburban Mobility Authority for Regional Transportation. Smart. But what we're going to look at here is City of Detroit service, which is most of the ridership in the region. Besides the buses, you've got the streetcar, the Q line, which, I don't know, again, not my favorite use of public funds, but it gives you a chance to see Woodward Avenue, which is really one of the all-time iconic American streets. I really do like the design of the Little Caesars, just as far as NBA arenas go. And then you get downtown and you've got stuff like the Fox Theater, which is just spectacular. So much of the original urban fabric of Detroit has been demolished that, I don't know, you just appreciate the stuff that's still there even more. Also, we can't leave Detroit without talking about the people mover. Again, for a cash-strapped city, not sure this is where I want my transit investments going, but I guess the infrastructure is a sunk cost, so what are you gonna do? Number 3 is Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Hampton, Portsmouth, Newport News. I poke fun at the Inland Empire, but this is truly the most incomprehensible metro area. Do any of my viewers live here? I mean, what is the central city? The main provider here is Hampton Roads Transit, and they do have light rail running out of downtown Norfolk out to the east, but it's kind of ineffective in the same way as Sacramento is. Look, I understand it's cheaper to build a light rail alignment along a freeway or where there's an abandoned rail right-of-way, but you're really inhibiting development potential when you do this. Let's zoom in on Harbor Park Station, which gets you pretty close to Norfolk Station on the Amtrak Northeast Corridor. There are much cooler train stations on this list. And it connects you to Harbor Park, home of the Norfolk Tides, AAA affiliate of the Orioles. And you've got a ferry landing here too. There is ferry service in the NTD data, which I believe covers a water taxi between downtown Norfolk and downtown Portsmouth. Number 2, well, let's get another viewer comment in here. J.R. Edmondson left this one on my Workhorse Streets video. Can we get a top 10 worst transit systems of 2 million plus MSA? Would love to see how terribly Indianapolis places. A common theme I get in viewer comments is people wanting me to shame their cities. It's sort of perverse, but yeah, I get it. And JR, I think you'll be pleased. Even though I did go down to 1 million for my metro area threshold, Indianapolis still manages to take the silver medal. This is Indianapolis and Marion County Public Transportation, branded as Indigo. They do have a sorta BRT. This is the Route 90 Red Line. It's fairly new, and you have to admit, the infrastructure is pretty nice. Let's fly down into the Fountain Square area on Virginia and have a look. You've also got the Cultural Trail here, which definitely belongs in a video at some point. And then the whole Virginia corridor, actually, is a great urban main street. You can always tell where the historic streetcars ran, can't you? Before we get to number 1, or really number 42 out of the 42 US urbanized areas over 1 million population, just a reminder to like the video if you're enjoying this peek into the dark underbelly of American transit underprovision. Subscribe if this kind of content improves your quality of life. And let's check the numbers. Today we're going to Galicia, Spain. We now have enough subscribers to fill the Balaídos, home of Celta Vigo, currently mid-table in their 10th straight year up in La Liga. You know, the stadiums over here just have such a different vibe from the typical North American stadium. You've got cafe scenes going on across the street, and yeah, the parking scene in front of the stadium isn't pretty, but look at the cars. If this was the US, it would be a bunch of oversized trucks and SUVs owned by people who like to cosplay being construction workers or pretend they're about to go off-roading at any moment. It's just so bizarre how different the car culture is. Dishonorable mentions. San Juan maybe belongs on this list, but it didn't feel right to include it because a lot of the ridership is on Publicos, which are in the data, but it's just such a different kind of service. So it doesn't seem apples to apples. I talked about the ferries in a different video, so let's just take a quick look at the Tren Urbano. It would be the only thing close to a grade separated system on this list. It is fully grade separated, but it is wild that the alignment doesn't go all the way north into Santurce or anywhere near Old Town. Any plans for an extension here? Let me know if you have insight. The other dishonorable is Dallas, which is by far our largest metro area, under 15 trips per capita. A good chunk of the ridership, maybe 30 or 35%, is from the light rail system, which isn't very extensive, which should kind of tell you just how bad the buses are. And finally, I thought about doing this whole thing by supply rather than by ridership, so aggregating up the total vehicle revenue hours instead of the unlinked passenger trips. But I really wanted to use the same approach I did in my small cities video, so you could make direct comparisons. And anyway, I did run the numbers on vehicle revenue hours, and you pretty much get the same list, except Inland Empire drops out and Providence shows up. The correlation makes sense. When you provide good service, people ride it, and when there's good ridership, you've got a constituency for better service. Okay, number one is a city I haven't really talked about on this channel, and I kind of hate to introduce it as number one on this list, but it's Memphis, Tennessee. Your main provider is the Memphis Area Transit Authority, and this is almost all bus ridership with a bit of streetcar, which we will get to. I didn't want to dig into the service characteristics for every city on this list, but in Memphis, their quote-unquote high-frequency routes run every 30 minutes. I hate to pile on specific agencies because every one of the agencies on this list has good people working behind the scenes, trying to make a difference. So instead of piling on, let's just take a moment and put some respect on the Memphis trolley. You've got 3 trolley lines, and the Main Street line runs every 12 minutes on what's mostly a car-free corridor. And I kind of hate to have a city this cool be number one on a bad list. So let's do a quick flyover of Memphis Central Station. May it return to glory in the hopefully not too distant US high-speed rail future. Unfortunately, this is a 10 worst list. So can I just say, this has to be the single least legible major city bus system in the US. I mean, when I drop into Street View, I can barely figure out where the bus stop is. Like, if I want to take transit in the year 2022 to see the most electrifying player in all of professional sports, bar none, where exactly do I do that? Okay, that's all I've got. As always, let me know what I missed. After all, I was using 2019 transit data, and Google Earth doesn't always show you everything. Keep the great topic suggestions coming, per usual. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.